to the New York Information Security Meetup / the Cyber Guild. It's just 1 minute past noon on December 28th, 2020. Just the tail end of the this great year we've had, and I have a great pleasure to introduce Morgan Wright, who is by far, I believe, has kind of the most credentials and most influential here in this these events that I've been hosting. I mean, my God, like you have unbelievable resume and history with even speaking engagement. I mean, I just Google your name and all I see is like CNBC, CNN, Fox News. You're everywhere, so I feel very privileged to have you on today's show.
Oh, you're too kind, man. A moving target's harder to hit, so I just got to stay in motion.
Yeah, and you're modest too. So why don't we get started? So how did you get started in cyber? Maybe kind of start, maybe just to give us an idea of kind of your early days. You mentioned that your first language was Farsi, which is, so how does it, somebody who's a U.S. citizen, knows how to speak Farsi? It's pretty amazing.
My dad was military. I was actually born at a military base, Fort Riley, Kansas, home of the 1st Infantry Division. Hooah, go Army, beat Navy, which we did this year. And Air Force, we won the Commanders-in-Chief trophy. So, so I grew up in Iran for 3 years. And so as a young kid, I went through kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade there at the American school in Tehran. And so one of the things, the byproducts you picked up at that time, the cost of living was obviously, much different, David. So we had a maid, we had a gardener, we had a driver. I mean, now it would have looked like we were living in the Hamptons, in a posh area. But actually, we had a house with a stone fence around it, glass front to the house, a little bridge going across the swimming pool. I mean, it was just like awesome. But I learned Farsi not only from the school, but from Roba Bey, which was our maid, Ali, which was our driver. And so you just pick up those things, over time. So, it was an interesting time when my parents have both passed away, but when my mom was the last one to pass away. Actually, over here to my left, I have the camel saddle, which we actually got from Iran. I had it recovered. So, we've got that. We've got some Persian rugs. We've got some stuff that just, a lot of history from that area.
Yeah, and it's amazing. So do you still speak it, or is it something that you
just a little bit? I can count to 10. Or I can say, go with God, Khoda Hafez. I just say enough to make people think, does he really know it or not? So they speak English around me.
That is phenomenal. So fast forward to that. So I'm assuming you were moving around a lot as a parent of a child of somebody who is in the military. What was your first experience, I guess, with kind of IT, information technology in general, computers, growing up?
Really none, not until I actually got into law enforcement, believe it or not. So I started as a rookie cop in Salina, Kansas back in 1982. I'm dating myself. But at that time, government was really the only ones that could afford technology. The regular people, consumers did not have access to this. So I would fill in at that time at Salina. Sworn officers were dispatchers and we had a desk sergeant. So it was kind of a promotion to be a dispatcher. So I would fill in for guys when they're on vacation. So I learned the computer terminals back then, which was an early AS400, so green screen, all that good stuff. So that was actually kind of my first start. But when I really started getting into it, I was actually a state trooper. I went from the city police department to being a state trooper. And my first computer was a Tandy 1000 SL. First one I could afford. You don't make much money being a cop. My wife was working at the police department. So we were, as the old joke goes, we were so broke we could barely pay attention. And so, but I saved up, I bought this Tandy. And so I started actually, and the way I really got into it, I was very lazy as a trooper. By that, I mean, when you would work accidents and you would do accident reconstruction, I went through and I took mechanical engineering. We would learn how to reconstruct accidents. A lot of math involved. And one of the complex formulas is called conservation of linear momentum. So if you change one variable in that, you got to recalculate this whole thing. And I was getting carpal tunnel from my thumbs on my Texas Instruments calculator, redoing stuff. So taught myself BASIC, wrote a couple programs. And then from on to that, I started learning how to do the early version of Electronic Arts had a 2-dimensional animation program. So there was this way to reanimate traffic crashes using Electronic Arts. So I would reanimate traffic crashes. You could see them coming in at scale speeds, hit, go off like that. So, and then from that led to when I became a detective, first computer crime course I went to was 1994, I believe, or 1993.
Wow. Were they computer crimes back then?
Yeah,
I guess
we were,
1994.
yes.
Wow.
Yeah, believe it or not, some of the things that they were finding was one of the things that got started was child pornography.
Hmm.
That was because you would save images, on your hard drive, or you would connect to the bulletin boards if you remember the old days of some of the
Yeah, BBS. Yeah.
Wildcat, BBS, things like that. So, and then, but believe it or not, even out of the military, that they were starting to see the Russians had already broken into some of our systems back in the late '80s. Reagan was even briefed on this, so started doing that. One of the funny quick story though. Here's the difference between state and local law enforcement and the feds. So we actually had a couple FBI agents in our class, and one of the things they said is, "Don't screw with it. Don't touch the computers. We're going to lunch. Don't touch them because we have them all set up for the next afternoon." And what they did is, in the old days, you remember in the DOS command lines, you could actually change the auto exec batch file. So you could change commands in there. So instead of running the script, for auto exec, you would type in like dir for directory.
Mm-hmm,
That was designed to make it look like you were deleting stuff. So if they typed in dir, it then invoked, deleting the hard drive. And so we were sitting back watching one of the FBI guys come in there and starts typing away, and it starts saying deleting hard drive. He looks around like this, doesn't see anybody, shuts the machine off, moves 2 tables over and sits at another machine and did. So that was my first computer crime I investigated.
Oh my God, that's amazing. That's an amazing story. So you've done that. So you went through in kind of the police forces, right? The state trooper, and then how do you become you basically the advisor for some very senior government officials. How do you move from how does the career progress? What was kind of the highlights? Because typically there's you go through all that motion of being, kind of literate and, kind of cyber savvy and so on, but it must be something that happened, throughout your career that kind of really propelled you to the next level.
It was 9/11. I was actually I was actually in Colombia working on Plan Colombia, and we were helping them build new technology capabilities to mine intelligence out of seized assets, the narco traffickers. And so, we were doing that. And so it was really about, at that time, understanding how do you apply technology to solve mission problems. And so a lot of people couldn't make the translation. They were either total geeks and could program stuff, or they were business people that had no clue how to flip on a computer. And I was kind of living in that world in between. And then 9/11 happened, and then we started looking at, we got to have bigger systems. So one of the first projects I did, we helped design and build, was for a classified, the details are classified. The program name was, and it was called Technology Exploration and Development. It was for the counterintelligence field activity part of the Joint Counterintelligence Assessment Group, mouthful of acronyms for DoD. And it was really, how do we take all this information and start looking at risk, risk from things coming across the border, risk from travelers, risk from things that are being shipped. And from there, it kind of, so as they started spending money, then they started saying, hey, we got to create now the Transportation Security Agency Administration, or TSA. I never, there's so many acronyms, you never know if it's agency or administration. Otherwise, it's DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration. But I started, I started picking up on cybersecurity, had done computer crime investigations, which kind of leads you to, okay, this is how things happen. This is how you break into stuff. And so one of the first proposals I was part of that we wrote for, I was at Unisys at the time. We actually won the original $1.5 billion bid for ITMS for TSA. And I wrote the cybersecurity piece of that. And so it was kind of, a lot of this, we were just learning, kind of as we went. But a lot of the work I did when I first came out was with SAIC, a defense contractor. We were doing cybersecurity for large banks, for government customers. Then, like I said, 9/11 happened. And then, so it kind of branched out into that. And then did some work. So I became an advisor for the U.S. State Department and their anti-terrorism assistance program. And one of the reasons was prior law enforcement experience, some intelligence experience, technology experience. We were out helping our new partners in the global war on terrorism, as it was called at that time, GWAT. I was over in Pakistan. I was over in Turkey. I'd been working in the Middle East. And so it was really about, how do you deliberately apply technology to solve these really big problems? And security was one of the biggest issues that nobody could really get their hands around. So I kind of, full circle come around. That was a long answer, but it kind of, there was 9/11 was the big defining moment. And then as I went further, we built things on top of that. I mean, hell, I used to teach, I still maintained, and I'll tell you, David, the one thing, last thing here, I still believed in the behavioral side of things because I always knew there's a behavioral aspect to any type, whether it was cybersecurity, technology, whatever it was. I used to teach interview and interrogation. I taught behavior analysis out at the National Security Agency. We had people from the CIA, the FBI, folks like that. I taught to state and local law enforcement. And it struck me as we were doing this is that understanding the behavioral component, especially around security, means that if I'm trying to bypass security, if I'm trying to bypass physical security or cybersecurity, one of the things I look at is what's one of the biggest vulnerabilities, and it's in the way we think. That's the biggest vulnerability. They say people are the biggest vulnerability. You know, I think the way we think collectively is the biggest vulnerability. Is that 9/11 happened? Why? Because we never thought somebody would fly 4 airplanes, you know, into physical objects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I guess your background as a detective also puts you in a better position to understand people. I'm assuming you've done a lot of like face-to-face questioning. You know, met a lot of people, including some criminals. You know, throughout the year. So that gave you some ideas.
Yep.
Do you still believe in you know, people are inherently good, or all those years in law enforcement made that change?
People are inherently good. I really believe that. And one of the things that it taught you is that there are people who are inherently good, but let me tell you, but when there are evil people, most citizens who have never been on, you know, my side of it don't really understand how evil people can really get, you know. So, but no, I believe people are inherently good. But as with any society, you know, hey, look, I believe cats are inherently good. I got 2 cats, but there are some cats who are monsters, you know. So my cats are good. So,
and then you also managed to give a testimony before Congress, right?
Yep.
What was that all about?
Healthcare.gov. So, this is when they were in a rush to launch Healthcare.gov. It launched on October 1st, which to coincide with the fiscal year. And then we had hearings, I believe it was November 13th of 2013 of that year. And really what I looked at is, you know, there were, at that time, the Republicans were in the majority. So when you testify before Congress, the majority party gets 3. They get to pick 3 witnesses. The minority party gets to pick 1. So there were 4 of us testifying. But I will tell you that there was very little daylight between all of our positions. As I do when I do analysis on the air, and I will tell, I've declined interviews even on some of the networks I've been on a lot. There are some opinion shows on certain networks, and I'm not going to mention which ones, but where the host has such an opinion, they want you to say something that aligns with their opinion. I'm like, dude, I do ones and zeros, not R's and D's. You know, you want to have political context, you go over there, but let's stick to the ones and zeros. And the ones and zeros of healthcare.gov just basically said this was not a secure system. Here's something that'll shock you. I still have the file. I got it because it was open source. Do you know what the original security plan for healthcare.gov consisted of?
No idea. That's probably something you should know.
25 rows of an Excel spreadsheet. No one person had visibility over what was going on. You had the Center for Medicaid, CMS. They didn't want to sign off on it. You had the CIO of HHS who said, "I'm not signing off on it." So they got a political appointee to sign off on what's called the interim or the authority to operate, ATO. You never have a political person. You got to have the technologist sign off on the authority to operate in the federal government so that you can get your system, you know, approved and running. And so there were a lot of concerns about how the program was managed, you know, how the view of vulnerabilities was managed, the who was in charge. At the end of the day, David, the real biggest problem was who's the single throat to choke if I have an issue, and nobody knew who was in charge. That was and you know what, and we got to be careful because I don't blame R's or D's. I tell you, this is an epidemic I've seen no matter whether it's in a Republican administration or a Democratic one. There is bad programs and projects that get launched out there all in the sake of political expediency. And technology doesn't know if it's an R or a D. That's the political motives behind it. So, you know, I've seen the same thing across multiple administrations.
Yeah. And there's also an issue of accountability, right? Because you mentioned no one wanted to sign a dotted line and be responsible. So do you feel that the private sector should step in? Because I think sometimes we feel like, that the government should step in and help us, right? Especially for, the companies or SMBs or the medium-sized companies that don't have the expertise around cybersecurity, and yet they require, in all due respect, it would probably require the same type of measures to protect themselves, but they don't have the means to do that. So do you think that we should, this is something we should, as a private sector, step in and assist, or, what's your take on that? Who should you fix? How do we can fix this, moving forward?
That if I knew that question, I would be on a beach retiring, and we would not be having this conversation right now because I'd be in Mexico, one of my favorite places to go for vacation. Cancun awaits for me. Here's the problem. Here's what it goes through. So I go back and I look at the original impetus for Sarbanes-Oxley for publicly traded companies. Why? Because, and actually it was in my county here too, Bernie Evers. I live in Loudoun County, Virginia. 80% of the world's internet traffic goes through my county, home of MCI WorldCom, where Bernie Evers, along with the people up in Philadelphia, in Adelphia, you had all of these other famous CEOs that were getting indicted and convicted for fraudulent taxes, on their corporate taxes, financial improprieties. Well, what happens is you go through three phases, and this will tie into the reason why I think here's what we're coming to on cybersecurity. So it goes through three phases. First, you go through litigation. Shareholders got ticked. They sued, right? Then they realized that wasn't enough, so they went to regulation. The SEC could promulgate certain regulations, which technically had the force of law, but it wasn't a law. And then you went to legislation. So you go through litigation, regulation, then legislation. So they legislated a fix to it, and they called it Sarbanes-Oxley. And basically what they said is, you, CEO, are now responsible. When you sign your name on the bottom line of that 10K, when you turn your stuff in, if it's fraudulent and if it's wrong, you are going to prison. Well, CEOs got the message. And when's the last time you heard about a big fraud case happening in the public sector? Yeah,
it's been a while.
Been a while, right? So I think we need a digital version. I do not like government intervention and regulation, except when necessary. I think we've reached that point. I think SolarWinds has taught us a lot of lessons about trust, about what things need to be done. So I think we've gone the litigation part. Many companies have been sued. It's now insurance policies. Do we cover ransomware? Do we do this? So then they've gone to regulation. And they've tried to, SEC has done it. They've tried other areas. The FCC has tried it. I think we need to come up with a legislative fix. And I think one of the fixes is that I don't want the government taking over private security, nor do I want the private security depending upon the government for their security. The only thing we should depend upon should be defending our nation, whether it's digital, or physical. And so the CIA, U.S. Cyber Command, them defending against attackers from the outside, that's one thing. But the day-to-day operations have to be the responsibility of business. Now, I think that we can do a better job of aligning the outcomes we want with the way we incentivize things. Mm-hmm. If, for example, it's like, I would rather give a business a tax break now for having better invest more in cybersecurity and hiring cybersecurity professionals than in terms of, everybody will talk about minimum wage and stuff. Well, guess what? There will be no jobs if your business is out of business. Let's keep the businesses in business first, and then let's deal with the other issue second. So I don't know that there's a good answer to that, David, but I do think that my answer would have been different prior to SolarWinds. Now, after SolarWinds, and the way that we've changed this entire trust model, zero trust. Does it work? Does defense in depth work? I don't know. A lot of people were employing those models, and guess what? They all still got hit. So, the question is, what is going to work in 2021?
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, and it's everyone's responsibility, including, it's a matter of national security, even if it's, when you think, okay, it's not just the Department of Energy or Homeland Security or whatever, it's companies that we know about, like Microsoft, Cisco, Intel, Deloitte, all those companies that, talking about SolarWinds specifically, that are kind of the backbone of the U.S. economy. And so it's everyone's responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen again. So why don't we kind of walk through the recent SolarWinds, the whole kerfuffle, and what was this all about, and why is that so different than the prior, because there were so many of them. If you look back in the past 5 years, almost every month that we have, a couple large hacks in the media and so on. What makes this one in particular very different?
So let's get a little context too. So I'm of the firm opinion, number one, Russia's behind this. Other people will disagree. That's okay. You guys, everybody's got their opinion. I believe Russia's behind this. And I believe specifically they're SVR for a couple reasons. Basically, it's around tradecraft. But we have to go back and think for a second. The first intelligence organization created was the Cheka. And it was created by Russia in 1917. The Russians have been doing this for 103 years. They've been in the intelligence game. They've been doing these things. So they've had several versions of the Cheka. They've had the GRU. They've had the NKVD. They've had the GRU is the military arm. They had then what became the KGB. And when that coup against Mikhail Gorbachev failed, then they split into the FSB and the SVR. FSB does internal stuff. SVR is external, along with the GRU. And so we have to think about what they did wasn't so much a technical exploit as it was an exploit of intelligence, an exploitation of human weaknesses, and an exploitation of human assumption. So we assume that if I use username, password, and two-factor authentication, by God, my communications are protected. If I use a VPN, my communications are protected, right? So what they did was they exploited our basic assumptions that if I do these things, everything is supposed to be trusted. What they did is they spent time and they looked at it and they say, what are the particular vectors that we could focus in on? That if we exploit these things, we can exploit everything. And I'll give you the example. Back when I was a detective, we actually had a series of burglaries that were going on, and we couldn't figure out how they were getting in because there was no breakage, there was no stuff. And sitting there thinking one day, and I'm going, it's like they had a key, but can somebody get a key to everything? And I thought, yeah, you can get a key to everything when you use the same locksmith. They didn't break into the businesses which had alarms and everything, or stuff over their windows. A lot of them didn't have alarms. What they did is they broke into the locksmith, who, by the way, had really crappy security for a locksmith store. They found the places because you would have keys in case something had to happen in the middle of the night. You needed stuff, so this locksmith would keep copies of keys. They figured this out. They broke into the locksmith instead, waited a while, and then started breaking into all these businesses. That's exactly what the Russians did. They found what is the one trusted thing everybody trusts. Well, if I cryptographically sign, if I do an MD hash of my update and I say, here's the hash, it hasn't changed, so it's got to be legit. This is the same problem we ran into trying to solve after 9/11 too. The problem was called the Secure Container Initiative. How do we ship these? There's so much stuff coming in on containers. Can you check every container? No, it's impossible to check every container. A container is also an update. It's impossible to check every update. So what we said is, let's look at the seal. Let's look at the shipping manifest. If it all lines up and it comes from a trusted source, well, let's trust the container. Well, we trusted the update. Why? Because it came from SolarWinds. SolarWinds would cryptographically sign it, and it kept getting embedded. Now, I'll tell you, one of my buddies, believe it or not, is Kevin Mitnick. And a couple of the FBI agents I actually ended up working with and training, because I used to train for 6 years on computer crime investigation. Mm-hmm. Two of the guys were the ones that caught Kevin Mitnick. Well, Kevin and I caught up years later, and we got to talking. Kevin is good technically, but Kevin was a very good social engineer as well. So you start looking at what are the human fallibilities you could take advantage of. That's what Russia did. They took advantage of the thing is that we trusted the updates that come in. The other thing they did too, David, is a lot of people say, well, we sandbox. We have an environment, we sandbox it, and we look at it. Well, how long do you look at it for? Most of them 2 to 3 days. Yeah. After 2 to 3 days.
Yep.
Yeah. So what did they do? Waited 12 to 14 days. They used, by the way, it wasn't a technical failure. It was a failure of human assumptions. I defined as the human that my sandbox limit is 3 days. After 3 days, boom, we'll push it operational. They waited 12 to 14 days. So it bypassed all of the, quote, security we had, the defense in depth, the zero trust. It totally violated. It's like being told the earth is no longer flat, it's round. Can you imagine what a shock that was for people several hundred years ago?
Yeah, and I thought people are still thinking, some of them do, that it's still flat, so. It's a flat Earth society, right? So
yeah, and what? God bless their heart, as they say in the South,
and they were everyone's IT, right? The sheer size, the impact of that particular. I mean, were there any companies that did not get impacted? Let's start with that. I mean, it's just staggering. Yeah. It's not just. This is the problem. I think. How long will it take us to even find out the impact?
So let me ask the first question, because I'm going to be shameless and selfish. Yes. Sentinel, I'm the chief security advisor for SentinelOne, so I wanted to be transparent about that. None of our customers got hit, even the ones that were identified, and had SolarWinds for updates. None of them got hit because it stopped the execution of it. And so that was a point of personal brag. Now I say, as far as we know right now, nothing has been impacted. But lots of places have been impacted by this. And I'm sorry, I get to talk. And what was the rest of the question, David?
No, just how long will it take us to figure out what just the impact, the sheer number. I mean, we're talking about numbers that were never before seen, because it's not just the companies themselves, right? It's their, it's a whole supply chain, right?
It's the software supply chain, right? So let me take it back.
Yeah,
Let me take
go
it
ahead.
back to a physical thing. During World War II, one of the things that would happen after a bombing run is bomb damage assessment. You'd fly bombers over at night. You'd fly fighter planes over at day equipped with cameras because you'd want to know, there are bombs hit. What was the extent of the bomb BDA, bomb damage assessment? What was the impact? They're now doing a damage assessment on SolarWinds. They're finding out, okay, now SolarWinds tried to minimize it by saying, look, they have 300,000 clients, but only 18,000 were targeted. Okay, 18,000, that's still, and what are they connected to? And what are those 18,000 connected to? That's a lot of companies. State and local government has been hit. Here's the thing that's concerning. We start looking at the damage assessment. We don't have a good idea. You know why? Because how long? So I go back to the WannaCry ransomware attack that North Korea launched, and they launched it with tools that were stolen from the NSA, one of those called, Eternal Blue, which took advantage of an SMB vulnerability in Windows. Anytime Windows puts out an update and a security patch to a product they haven't supported in a couple of years, that's a red flag. I'm not the brightest guy in the room, but if you tell me I need to fix something, on my computer that you haven't supported for 2 years, I'm going, there's an exploit coming, which there was. To this day, you know that there are still Windows SMB machines that have not been patched that are still vulnerable to the WannaCry exploit. So how long will it take? The only way to be sure, and where I live is Northern Virginia. We have a lot of the intelligence communities around me. I have a neighbor pointing this way. His brother works for the State Department helping build embassies. He was involved in the building of the embassy in Russia. It got to the point where there were so many electronic bugs that were built into the wall, and there was no way to remediate it. They just had to tear it down, start all over again, and change how they hired workers, change how they brought in materials. So am I saying that we're going to have to tear everything down? I don't know. It's very tough to rip and replace the internet, but at some point we're just going to, I know one of my other friends, one of my other neighbors too, works for the Department of Justice. I won't say which component agency, but inside of that, they've actually had people walk away from their computers and just say, shut them off, not going to use them anymore, because they can't trust them. They don't know if they've been remediated or not. So it could, it may take just simply cutting the cord. You got to cut it off or shut it off, but you got to do something and just start with a new model. And I think we're going to have a very serious discussion, whether it's at the congressional level or at the level like what you're doing here, David, with talking with other professionals to say, everything that we believed should have worked failed us in the SolarWinds campaign. And it's more than a hack. This was an intelligence operation that exploited basic human vulnerability. And once I could exploit the way we thought about the problem, getting the technical countermeasure, that was easy to do.
Yeah,
Figuring out the rest was the hard part.
Yeah, Morgan, and this is what I love about what you describe. I want it to be clear that we're not, again, because I think we kind of got used to having these hacks on the news all the time. I think people I don't think it's sunk in terms of what the magnitude and the scale of what just happened. It almost kind of went by, but it's going to have some fundamental shift and impact in terms of the government industry as a whole as well, right? How we patch system, how we distribute software. And then, a lot of companies don't have the privilege to shut the computers and walk away. What are these guys doing?
Yeah, and one of the lessons we learned from COVID too is everybody had a business continuity plan. How many people had a pandemic continuity plan?
Yeah.
0. And we all prepared for disasters, but not catastrophes. And so one of the lessons we learned out of this, as people were shoving operations to work from home, talking with partners that SentinelOne has and talking with other people in industry, people ran out of laptops. There were no laptops to be sold because everybody was saying, we always thought we would be gone somewhere for a couple weeks. Now we're talking a year. In my area, you ought to see the occupancy rates around this area right here. There will be people, and so one thing that I want to disabuse people of using, I never want to hear the phrase used again, is the new normal. Normal means things that are expected, supposed to happen a certain way. This is why SolarWinds happened, because it was normal to get an update. Guys, we're dealing with a new reality. This reality changes every single day. You take the world as you find it, not as you wish it was. And the world we're finding in is that people will continue, bad actors, especially nation states and criminal organizations, will continue to exploit our weaknesses, our fallibilities, in order to achieve their objectives. So don't tell me there's such a thing as a new normal. Not when it changes every day, not when the threat changes, every single day. I mean, there are 1,000 malware variants, every day, if not every hour. Geez, I don't know. So how can you say it's a new normal? That's one phrase I want out of the lexicon for 2021.
Well, it's one step in the right direction. We boycott here on the this podcast.
You're my people then. All right.
So no more new normal. That's it. It's done. So what can companies do right now? I mean, as you mentioned, we're not secure. You have MFA, we have strong password, VPNs, and so on, and that is clearly not necessarily the be all and end all of security. What else can they do in aside from like, okay, walking away from the machine, turning them off? What can they do right now at kind of the least amount of effort and expense, obviously, to try to at least mitigate and continue business?
I think we've got to throw away all of our old assumptions and start new and start afresh and start thinking about the problem differently. So I think, there is no easy answer to this. It's not like, well, if we just start doing this today, we'll be okay. It's a long, hard slog, as you were saying. We don't know what the damage is. We have an idea based upon DNS traffic about what sectors were targeted and which companies were. So if you haven't been hit, then what I would say is just double down. By the way, one of the things I believe will come out of this, now I don't want to stake my professional reputation on it, but I would almost be willing to bet that the way SolarWinds got started was something as simple as a phishing or a spear phishing email. And I would say it's probably spear phishing. I would say I would identify and target somebody inside SolarWinds. Why? Because they are not a cybersecurity company. They are a network management system company. They, IT ops and stuff like even though they have cybersecurity, they are not a cybersecurity company. So I would spend some time. By the way, one of the biggest first major attacks was against the Zaporizhzhia hydroelectric plant, western Ukraine in Kiev, that the Russians did December 25th, 2015. This is why I said you have to have an understanding of your adversary. So why did they pick the date December 23rd, 2015, David? Do you know why that is an important date in history? I'm going to tell you. Because 1 year before, exactly 1 year before, December 23rd, 2014, the Ukrainian parliament voted 333 to 70, I think it was, to change their status from non-aligned to aligned. You have to be an aligned nation to join NATO.
So, Morgan, you don't think it was a coincidence? The date?
I don't. As a friend of mine who worked in the Russian intelligence at one time, I don't believe in coincidence, comrade. No, there are no coincidences in this. And so, but the reason I say that is that started off with the spear phishing email, looked like it came from the Ukrainian parliament, had a spreadsheet attached to it. In that spreadsheet was a macro. What's the one thing you should not do with macros in a spreadsheet? Is enable them. They enabled them. That was the stair step. They spent 6 months doing reconnaissance inside the network till they found the credentials. They harvested the credentials. For you geeks out there, they got into the Windows domain controller, so they had access to everybody's. They found the credentials for the VPN to get into the industrial control system. They spent 6 months doing this. So this campaign, we're finding out from FireEye and Kevin Mandia that it looked like a dry run was done in October of 2019. In other words, they sent a non-malicious package, but they put software in there. Was it going to be detected? Was anybody, detecting on it? Nobody did. So dry run complete. Then they went operational. I guarantee you this campaign probably took at least a year to design and create before it was actually executed starting back in March. So,
yeah, and it's amazing the scale of even like the preparation and the amount of time it took. And again, people have to understand that to do something for a year, think about the costs involved, right? There are people out there going to be, actively working on it. So somebody has to sponsor this because, typically the criminals, if they're not state sponsored, I mean, they're looking for a quick buck, right? They're looking for, to get revenue quick. They're not into, 18, 24 months campaign to get X dollars. No, they're looking for something they can do within 2-3 weeks, get, ransomware, going on and, get a $500,000 in ransomware and then move on. Right. But the sheer extent of the preparation that was included in this shows you the extent of the fact that it was a nation state, right? As you mentioned, it wasn't like something that, right. a kind of a private hacker with a group of individuals that went on and decided to do this.
Yeah, you bring up a very good point. At the end of the day, criminal groups like GanCrab, remember GanCrab when they finished up their ransomware campaign? According to them, they made, by a lot of estimates, they made over $3 billion from this ransomware. There was a financial motivation. The motivation for countries like China and Russia is information. It's theft of information. It's espionage. It's state secrets. It's military secrets. So there is a different outcome. So that means, from a logistics standpoint, I can put time, people, resource, and money into a campaign because my outcome is not a financially based outcome. In other words, I don't need, like you said, a $500,000 ransom. What I need is the information. Now, I will parlay that later. Why do they break into these universities? Something I said is that, my concern with China and Russia from a state-sponsored standpoint is it's the race to the cure. It's the COVID-19 vaccine. If you can corner the market on a vaccine or, something around that, it's going to be worth hundreds of billions of dollars over the long term. And so the theft of information from universities and academics, these are key targets, not because they're going to monetize it that day, but it's about control. It's about political control. It's about regional control and controlling an entire supply chain of vaccine. That's why Russia rushed to announce, we have a vaccine, comrade. Yeah, did they? I don't think so. Vladimir didn't take the initial jab, so I'm a little concerned about, whether or not they really had a vaccine or not. But at the end of the day,
they announced it back.
Yeah,
they announced it back, and I was like, yeah, okay, well, how often does Russia come up with yeah, well, exactly. And it's funny because I watched a recent documentary about so Russians are also notorious about the way they were handling their expat comrades, people that were part of their regime and then decided to move on, found themselves in very unfortunate circumstances. Is it something that people that are talking against Russia should be concerned about, or is it something that only happens like in the movies? What are your thoughts about that?
There's a great episode that I think was on, I'm not sure if it was A&E, one of the networks, but it's called The Salisbury Poisonings, and it was about the two Russians who were poisoned, and one of them was former, I believe, KGB, it might have been, but former intelligence guy, and so, yeah, they will go to great extents because that's what they do. Now, one of my other friends retired from the CIA as the chief of station, which is the head spook, and he was in Moscow. He's pretty public. He's on Fox News. He's a contributor on a couple of the papers. And so there is a line you draw, too. It used to be way back when, too, even back when it was the Cold War, and it was called, Moscow was called the denied area. It was very difficult to operate then. Even then, intelligence officers rarely carried guns. I mean, you just didn't carry guns because it wasn't about shooting people. You might get your butt kicked by KGB if you were able to break surveillance and go black, is what they say. So the worst thing that happened is you might get a little bit of an ass kicking. But but if you're an enemy of Russia, if you're a journalist, if you are somebody who's could be an oligarch that's ticked Vladimir Putin off, yeah, I think that you should be concerned. But I don't think speaking out like this, other than I look at the stats on my website. My website's not that exciting. It's just a place to get speaking engagements and stuff. But guess who the top two countries are? I permanently blacklisted them: China and Russia. When I see the amount of pings and attacks coming in from them, it's like 1,000 a week just from China.
Yeah, they're your biggest fans, obviously.
Congrats, yeah.
And also, I don't think people realize that, Russia is being, is a huge country, right? But from a economic standpoint, they're far from being a superpower. I think California's economy is probably like exponentially larger, from.
Oh. Yeah, I mean, and even from a population standpoint, geographically they're a large country, but things changed after the breakup of the Soviet Union. So you had a lot of the satellite countries, people that were part of the Soviet bloc that are no longer. So their geographical footprint has declined a lot, and Vladimir is trying to reassert Russian authority, Russian power. We're starting to see things around artificial intelligence, what they call LAWS, lethal autonomous weapon systems. You're starting to see, new stealth fighters. You're starting to see the overflights now. They're encroaching, U.S. territory and stuff. So we're starting to see some of the same Cold War tactics. But the reason we won the original Cold War, part of it was our technology. But really, what we did is we just spent Russia into the ground. We made Russia believe that Star Wars was this really going to be just wipe them out, big, expensive program. We just basically bankrupted them. And that's the reason the Cold War really worked the first time. I don't know that it'll work the second time because the world is far different. But again, yeah, it's like from an economic standpoint, they have trouble. From a military standpoint, they still can't field the same military they did back during the Cold War. So they are not a superpower anymore. I mean, they're a nuclear power, but the ability to project power the way they did back during the Cold War has drastically changed.
Yeah, and it almost feels like the SolarWinds hacks. It feels like almost like a beginning of something, right? Almost like and again, I don't want to be, stating here to the public, but it feels like something's happening that, fast forward like 12, 18, 24 months from now, will be, oh, yeah, this was a monumental, shift in terms of, you call it whatever you like, whether it's, the cyber Cold War, or the cyber Pearl Harbor, or, there's all kinds of cyber atom bomb went off. Yep. But again, I think there's something fundamental has to shift. And I think that, people like yourself are out there advocating for that change.
Here's my biggest concern about what just happened. And it's not about the solar, this is where the advantage I've had from working with a lot of people in different areas. I've been able to learn from them. And one of the things that struck me, this is very similar to what they call IPB, intelligence preparation of the battlefield. When you go to war with an adversary, the first thing you do is you got to collect intelligence. You collect intelligence about the ground. If you think about D-Day in World War II, we spent a lot of time and effort. When I say we, I mean the Allies, getting sand from Normandy Beach and Omaha and Utah Beach. We needed to know, because we had to put these big harbors in there called mulberries. We had to bring aircraft in. So Utah, we wanted to know what the Germans were up to with their heavy water production. Where were they with the atom bomb, at that time? So before you go after an adversary, you do a lot of preparation of the battlefield, for economic to weather to military strength. If you look at some of the people that were compromised, that include the National Nuclear Security Agency. Now, it wasn't their classified network, but still, you can get a lot of information. They have what they call basically data. It's leakage. You basically, a lot of times, classified information will unintentionally leak into unclassified information. But you also got into the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Why that? Because they're connected. They don't run the energy grid, but they know a lot about the vulnerabilities of the energy grid. And if you want to bring a nation to its knees, David, you go after two things. And this was what a former Israeli Air Force general said, and he's absolutely right. You go after two things: power and water. Mm-hmm. That will bring a nation to its knees.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's absolutely fascinating. And I appreciate your view on it. And, again, I think that hopefully we'll do this again soon in the next 6 to 12 months, and then things will be slightly better, or at least we have a more understanding, deeper understanding of what just happened. So unfortunately, we're running out of time. Again, I feel like we can keep on diving a little deeper into this. But where can people find you, Morgan? What's the easiest way for people to reach out to you?
Go to Bing or Google, just put in my name. I've been around, but look, my website is morganwright.us. I mean, I don't maintain it as much as I should. I used to write for The Hill, so it's not as updated as I want, but you can find me on Twitter at morganwright_US. I'll put some things out on there, and then I'll be doing a lot of stuff for the networks. Again, I do ones and zeros, not R's and D's, so I don't do political stuff. So catch me, any one of those places. And, if I can ever be of help, just let me know. Also, if you find me also too, I'm over at SentinelOne, their chief security advisor. So find me over there as well.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Morgan. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you today. I feel like we really uncovered, a couple of kind of sensitive topics, and I really appreciate you bringing this up and able to share this with us. And again, I hope that we can do this maybe physically in New York City sometime soon. Hopefully in the next couple of months, once everybody gets the vaccine and we're off to the races. So again, I appreciate you.
And that will be another interesting discussion. Who keeps all the information on the people that have been vaccinated? Who controls that information, and how well are we protecting it? Oh my God, another headache.
So thanks again, Morgan, and looking forward to meeting in person soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining.